Stephen Donofrio. Stephen, if you're with us, Director of Ecosystem Marketplace, 15 plus years operating the world's first largest and internationally recognized all carbon market offsets tracking and knowledge sharing mechanism. The floor is yours. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Peter. As always, it's just phenomenal to see the conference and how it continues to grow and continue to remain extremely relevant, over the years. So I think, usually my by, slides, because we show to talk about the size of the market, how it's growing and everything else. But, for this presentation, I think I'll attempt to do something later, but I know that we try to do these without screen shares. So the scene setting I want to provide here is just that, voluntary carbon offsetting and markets are nothing new. It's been around for, 15 to 30 years, depending on how you define voluntary carbon, whether it was for, debt for nature swaps or, further on, when you have utilities or energy companies purchasing, offsets or investing in land to offset disruptions or impacts they might have had. So, that's the old days. That, today, in the past, 15 years, we've had just an incredible amount of energy to develop standards, protocols, ensure that these projects are developed with rigor, that there's safeguards against, issues like permanence or making sure that they truly are additional. And as that has happened, the corporate and demand side of the market, or potentially demand side of the market, that too has gone through a 15 or 20 year surge. My career in this space really began in many ways by working at the Chicago Climate Exchange, where I heard SO2 and NOx and other acid rain program comments being made earlier. That the Chicago Climate Exchange was really spawned out of that. It was the first, cap and trade program for North America in the absence of the U.S. being a part of the Kyoto Protocol, and so the United States had to develop an offset strategy that did not exist in other, developed economies, where we had to create a lot of homegrown projects out of landfill methane, agricultural soils, and as well as forestry, land use, and other types of projects. So, this has been a 15 or 30 year process, is I guess the point I'm trying to make here. And when companies have been evaluating their own emissions portfolio, and now we're seeing this surge of activity in the last couple of years around this term net zero. And also, I think another term that gets kind of bundled up within net zero, but it's really not the same, which is carbon neutrality. That this is now creating a demand signal that we really haven't seen ever before. A voluntary demand signal coming out of the corporate sector, which is then sending this sort of scramble of activity to try to figure out exactly how those goals can be fulfilled. So you have initiatives that are being developed, such as the Task Force on Scaling Voluntary Carbon Markets, which was initiated by the former governor of the Bank of England, Mark Carney, and a number of other kind of leaders, are behind that initiative to try to create some sort of common set of protocols and definitions around offsets and core carbon principles, ways that these types of contracts can be standardized and brought into the exchange world, as well as the OTC over-the-counter market. But you also have activity happening on the other side, which is around defining the ways in which companies can actually establish their net zero goals aligned with carbon neutrality, and which is more so focused on netting out, carbon neutrality is about taking a certain scope of emissions and just going through it with offsets and neutralizing it, whereas net zero is really taking a long-term approach, saying we've got the next 20 or 30 or 40 years to get to a net zero goal, that how do we actually, build a trajectory that takes us from 0 to 5 years, 5 to 10 or 15 and beyond. And what we are seeing within ecosystem marketplace, just an incredible surge of activity related to both the product development, the investment into offsets, as well as the demand side signals that are stating that within their net zero goals, how offsets will be incorporated. And this is, they can be very specific about saying for the next 0 to 5 years, we will be investing into carbon offsets, but beyond that, we will slowly, trickle out so that we are focusing more so on direct emission reductions. But I think what is kind of commonly understood is that we cannot achieve the goals of getting to zero carbon, today by driving emission reductions down at our direct operations or by going 100% renewable. And so we need to have a pathway, to year 2030, 2040, 2050, in order to be able to get the emissions down. So in terms of some numbers, the growth in the market, last year in 2019, when we did our survey in 2020 for 2019, and we're about to do this again. We just launched our survey for 2020 and year-to-date 2021 calendar year information about transactions. We saw a jump again in transactions in 2019 to 104 million tons of offsets being transacted. We just are about to put out a report looking at the demand side of this 104 million tons, and we're finding that the most of that tonnage is going to Europe or going to North America. And within those two bubbles, in previous years, it used to be more government, nonprofit, activity, but now the for-profit private sector activity is really just dominating. And the interest in terms of project types is focusing on a diversity depending on the geographic location of these buyers, but it is heavily focused on what is now being called as carbon removals, but is also historically understood as forestry and land use, and other terms of natural climate solutions. So this would be forestry and land use type of projects. But the market has grown about 10 times in the past decade, with about 81 million tons were retired off of the market. So this means they were taken out of circulation in 2020. Natural climate solutions, or those carbon removals from natural technologies such as forests and forest conservation, new forests, new tree plantings, soil carbon sequestration, that scaled about 40% last year. And then also, what's really interesting is we also put out a report about a few weeks ago looking at just issuances and retirements over the past year, but focusing in on Q1 of 2021 and doing some comparisons. We found that for the first time ever in the history of offsets in the voluntary market, that January and February of 2021 was the first time that retirements outpaced issuances. And so that's a really strong signal that a lot of that activity of retirements that happens in Q1 of a certain year, that's to kind of do the carbon accounting for commitments that were made in the year prior. So that really goes to show, I think we're going to see even more movement as we get through 2021 leading up to Glasgow, where we have the initiative I mentioned before around the task force and scaling voluntary carbon markets. It is estimating that the voluntary market needs to grow 15-fold by 2030 and 100-fold by 2050 in order for us to have a chance at meeting the Paris Agreement, acknowledging that we need to drive emission reductions down at our operations. We need to change our energy sources, but we need offsets to be a part of this solution in order for us to have a chance at that Paris Agreement goal. And also, I think what's really interesting in terms of the net zero commitment side of this is that we now have about 21% of the world's largest 2,000 companies that are public. That represents about 14 trillion in sales that have net zero goals. So what is kind of very critical in the next year, or even more short term than that, is that these companies with these net zero goals are starting now to put meat on the bones. They've developed these goals past couple of years. Many of them have had a long track record of setting goals related to science-based targets, or even before then they had goals around their direct scope 1 and 2 emissions. But the pace that we need to now see these action plans is, I think, going to really be important. Media seems to be really, getting on top of the issue and trying to, put some teeth into these commitments. And we have a little bit of experience with this at Ecosystem Marketplace. In 2014, we launched an initiative called Supply Change to track zero deforestation goals. We now have about 1,000 companies that we're tracking, and there's many more out there. Most of them that were part of some major initiatives, such as the World Economic Forum's Tropical Forest Alliance or Consumer Goods Forum and others, that had a 2020 aspiration or commitment is more actually the word is, they had this 2020 commitment of getting to zero net deforestation. And, the challenge was that when you set these goals, you really don't know fully how you're going to get there. And so the incremental progress does need to be reported, needs to be, communicated, but also so too do the challenges. So we're going to need some, incredible transparency in the net zero space, because what we saw over the decade from 2010 to 2020 for those net zero goals of deforestation was that very few, if any, companies, truly met that end goal. But they achieved a whole lot of other things along the way, such as, ensuring that you're safeguarding biodiversity, you're protecting watersheds, you're choosing better suppliers and having better traceability and transparency. So there's a lot of efforts that took place there, and we need to be able to start to put in the same kind of tracking for these net zero goals. And what we've started to do is try to see where offsets are fitting into these net zero goals. Is there a time horizon being defined? Are there specific project types or standards that are being defined in order for those companies to meet these goals? And I guess I'll leave it with this, which is that the price on carbon is fundamentally undervalued. We get data reported to us. Last year we had about 152 global organizations, product developers, very small to very big, intermediaries, investors, traders, reporting data to us. And we found that global averages are around $3 to $4 a ton. $3 to $4 a ton to pay for a carbon offset. And we know that these projects, many of them do require much more than that. And so there is a diversity. You have, for example, renewable energy projects we saw coming out of China and India had, about $1 or less, per ton average price, whereas forestry and land use here in North America, such as afforestation, reforestation, was closer to $7 or $8 a ton. So the numbers do spread differently, and that's why what we're trying to do is meet the market, where it is, by providing kind of more data tools that allow you to filter the information to really be able to unearth the price per ton or the potential opportunity for projects that you could be investing in to use as offsets, by looking at the supply and transaction side of the market. These prices need to scale up in order for these projects to really scale with that task force and scaling VCM goal of getting to Paris Agreement ambition by using offsets. And I think that's just a fundamental need across the board is needing to ensure the prices on carbon are as accurate as possible. So much more I would love to be able to get into, but in the interest of time, I'm happy to leave it there and would love to field some questions if there is enough time for that.
Thank you very much, Stephen. This is terrific. And yes, we do have questions, and of course, and I have my own questions, but I'm also going to pick up on some of them which have come through the Q&A. I am struck, and I've been in this world for a long time. I was a delegate to Kyoto, which is now over 20 years ago, strikingly enough. The number of companies that are now responding, that you've now indicated, those that are engaged, that I also get my shareholder voting opportunities, and invariably there is a request from shareholders for them to embrace net zero, and invariably the recommendation from the board is to not vote for that one. What's really going on? I mean, is this generational? A lot of this, I think, is generation, the Gen Zers. There are still some companies that are still pushing back. Could you address that? I mean, what have we reached a point now where they realize that it's generational, that they won't be able to get people to work for them of this next generation, or do they think that the regulatory environment is coming down? What's motivating these companies to get so motivated, and what's driving this, and does that give you reason for optimism? And what's your message to those companies that aren't yet with the program?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I've heard consistently over my career, and I'm sure this would be consistent with you too, is that the corporate sector isn't worried about tackling climate change, but what in terms of a carbon price and understanding what the pathway that they need to take in order to make certain investments is just that that certainty. We need to know what the demands are, what the asks are, whether it's regulation or it's B2B or C2B. So all these things I think have come together in a number of ways where the theory of change of what gets measured gets managed is starting to be realized. Companies, when we were at CCX, were going through basic scope 1 carbon accounting, scope 2 carbon accounting, putting companies on a legally binding commitment to getting to essentially a 1% reduction per year. Fast forwarding to now, where these companies have been at this for a long enough period of time where they know where those short-term savings can be in terms of reductions, and they've already made those investments. So I think increasingly, as we find more and more companies getting to the place where they have already gone through their 0 to 3 year type of payback period projects that have a low capex, that then they're going to start to they need to put these long-term plans in place. You set that goalpost, just like the race to the moon, and then you get that goalpost in the ground, and you start to then it's maybe seen as buying time, but you're more about realizing that in order for investments to be made, you need to have the money, you need to be able to have returns, and not all of these types of projects are at the same weight, especially not for every different sector. So I think you're seeing also, like you said, the bottom up happening, where this new generation is demanding something from the companies that are in their 401ks and in their their Roth IRAs or whatever it might be. They're demanding more from that because they don't want to be investing in things they don't believe in. And there's also a growing population that just wants to make sure that there is a future for them. So the Fridays for Future movement has definitely made a mark. So there's no doubt about that on all fronts.
And that plays right into Joseph's question about your view on customer-driven voluntary reduction programs. And I mean, Shopify, there's a number of initiatives that are customer-driven. Can you comment on that and the impact in the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, Etsy, and I mean, really small kind of groups, and then also, you see the, Amazon in the last couple of years, it just feels like companies like this have taken a 180 in terms of their approach, and the climate pledge, which is led by Amazon in a lot of ways, and Salesforce and a number of these other companies. There's something to be said for the galvanization that's happening amongst corporates that have a similar set of challenges ahead of them, and needing to kind of have a coordinated strategy. And so that consumer facing element for a lot of those companies directly impacts them for sure.